Getting started. All right, so thank you both for joining me today. We're going to talk about Hypothesis. Hypothesis is a social annotation tool. Typically, faculty use Hypothesis to allow students to make notes and have discussions within documents that they are assigning for readings or various discussion prompts and so forth. There's also a number of ways that Hypothesis can be used throughout the classroom. And so we'll get into some of that today. So first, I'm going to give kind of a brief overview of Hypothesis and its uses. I'm going to focus today on using Hypothesis within an LMS. But there are options you should know of using Hypothesis outside of the LMS. And there's a workshop that I've linked here, so I'll send that to you as well, that John did in winter breakout of 2021 on using Hypothesis as a web kind of add-on tool. So there is ways to do that. It's not the way that I primarily use Hypothesis in my teaching, but there are other options if you choose not to integrate it into your course shells. And I will say, and I've got a note on this later on, that Hypothesis will be integrated with Brightspace, and so it should function identically to the process that it exists in Blackboard, but of course it's not quite integrated yet. So I'm going to do my examples and presentation in Blackboard today, but presumably it will function the same way in Brightspace, and I'm sure we will have updated workshops and recordings on using this tool within the Brightspace LMS as well. So we'll go through some examples on Blackboard. So if you all actually have a moment and you want to log into your Blackboard, we'll actually join the CELT community group, which I believe both of you should have, really everyone on campus should have access to. So I'll show you the steps to do that here in a minute. But if you want to go ahead and log into Blackboard and do your authentication, just so that we're ready to go here in a few minutes, that will help us work a little seamlessly. All right, so after I'm done kind of going through some different examples, we'll have time for questions, but we also have an opportunity to workshop our own assignments in Blackboard and think about whether you want to enable grading, having deadlines for submitting annotations, and incorporating that into your assessment as an assessment activity in your classes. So with that, so Hypothesis is what we call a social annotation tool, right? So it embeds discussions within a document, right? Or a web page, as you might decide in your classes. Annotations can be public, so they can be viewable by everybody in the class. They can be private to yourself, right? So that only you get to see your comments and notes on a document, and it can also be restricted to a group. So if you were to create a group in Blackboard, you could create a separate assignment or a separate annotation Hypothesis assignment for each of those groups, so that you have it narrowed down for a particular small group, right? If you wanted to break your class into small groups, you could use Hypothesis within those groups to make comments and engage in discussions on those materials there. The other really unique thing that Hypothesis does is it creates user tags. So you can, if you, for instance, wanted to group annotations by the type of reflection that they are engaging in. So maybe it's a reaction, or maybe it is a connection to other course material, or maybe that annotation is about reflecting on their lived experiences, you can create specific tags to then allow students to group their particular annotations according to some categories. So we'll go through a little bit what that could look like. It could be content specific, and it could be specific to the types of discussions or notes or annotations that students are making on those documents. So, Hypothesis, it can be used for online learning, but also to supplement your in-class learnings. I use Hypothesis in all of my courses that I supply some kind of supplemental reading. Typically, faculty can use it to link to readings like PDFs or websites, but I also use it for peer review. So I will upload my students' work to a hypothesis assignment, right? And other students in that class can then make comments and suggestions on each other's papers. And it becomes like a really nice way for that peer review process to happen in one location, and multiple students can jump into multiple documents and give their feedback. But for as far as course readings go, I find, and I think other faculty who've used Hypothesis find that it's a really great way to hold students accountable for completing their readings, and to help them kind of connect across other course material or even beyond their course into their own life experiences, to demonstrate their understanding of these concepts. So it's a really versatile tool, and it can really be done to suit whatever goals you have for the course. You can use this in lieu of discussions. You can use this primarily for students to be accountable to their readings. I even had asked my students a few semesters back if they felt like this process was something that helped them stay accountable to their readings, and they said it certainly did. They didn't always like that, but they did find that it was a useful tool to keep them prepared for discussions. And I think, at least in my experience, students, having them complete their notes and annotations on an assignment prior to coming to class to discuss it has really helped the quality of discussions in class. And it's certainly avoided a lot of the very awkward silences where I finally am like, you didn't do it, did you? You didn't do the reading. And they're like, yeah, no, we did not do the reading. And it's that can be a very frustrating moment for faculty and staff who are in the classroom. But I think in some ways, all of those points of frustration are opportunities for us to try to find new ways to overcome what is a fairly persistent issue from class to class. So things that you need to get started. So essentially, Hypothesis in Blackboard is like creating an assignment, right? You create a assignment link for Hypothesis. You upload a document that can be readable. And so you can set all kinds of, you can enable evaluation on it, enable a grading function on it. You can enable a due date for that grade and so forth. So it functions very similarly to that. It will also, when you enable grading, it will link to your gradebook. So that does, at least in Blackboard, that is an automatic process. So that's, can be helpful to, keeping your keeping that work organized and linked to the gradebook. So you do need a OCR PDF format, right, for all of your readings. And so OCR is optical character recognition. Essentially, your document needs to be searchable, right? You need to be able to highlight a single line of text. So it cannot be a picture of a page of text, right? So there are really fabulous scanners if you're like working with a a physical copy of a book, for instance. There are really awesome scanners in the library. I'm sure there are scanners elsewhere on campus, but the ones I'm very intimately familiar with are in the library, and they can make all of your accessible PDF dreams come true. So it is a really, there's some great technology that can help create even, physical copies into accessible PDFs. Most of the time, PDFs that you download, from journal articles or news articles have the option to be saved as a OCR PDF. So that is something that you do want to keep in mind, because the goal, right, is that you're having students comment on specific parts of text or specific areas of a document, and making their annotations based on those particular areas. And so if you don't have a PDF that is searchable, they will not be able to highlight text and make a comment on their highlighted text. So if you do not have a downloaded PDF, you can link to a website. So you either need a OCR PDF or you need a link to a URL. The one thing that you want to be careful with any particular news article is that you're not assigning articles that are behind a paywall, right? Because it will embed into this hypothesis document, and if it's behind a paywall, students won't actually be able to access it. If you do have a subscription, you can often download those articles as a PDF, and you can kind of get around in that particular way. But you do want to be conscious of what websites you are sending students to and making sure that they actually do have access to them when they are engaging in the hypothesis tool. The other thing you want to think about are your goals for the activity. Is this replacing a discussion? Are you going to be assessing their written annotations in a formative way, in an evaluative way? Is it low stakes? Is it high stakes? Do you want to create a rubric? And the one I think sort of downside of hypothesis is that at least when it's integrated into your LMS, you don't have the option to link a rubric to that graded assignment. So where else in other assignments you could go through the rubric and make your selections, you can't do that within hypothesis. You could create a separate graded column where you would have a link to the rubric there, but you would have to side by side, fill out the rubric while you were looking at the annotations on a separate page or separate screen. So that's another thing to consider. If it's a low stakes assignment and you have, kind of just broad ideas of what needs to be completed in order for them to get full credit, it's a really great way for low stakes assessment as well. Any questions so far about? No? Okay, I see both heads shaking. So I do want to go into a couple of Blackboard examples. So if you haven't yet, open Blackboard. And I'm assuming you have logged into Blackboard, but if you haven't, just give me oh no, I haven't done it yet. So open up Blackboard. And on the top, you'll see a community section. You should all be part of the CELT community there. If you click on to contents, you can select the hypothesis workshop, and that's a folder within the contents area. And then you can click on one of the links and you can start adding annotations. And I'm actually going to have us all go into the same one here in a minute. So I'm going to, can you see both pages on my screen now? Okay, great. So if you're into content, right, once you're into that CELT community, the hypothesis workshops right here at the top. So you can click on any of these. Right. The one I was hoping we could kind of jump into, if no one had objections, was an example that I actually pulled from my CRJ course. So I'm going to just show us how to what this looks like, and what, some of those students' responses have been in here. And then we'll kind of go into the technical parts of how do we actually create this assignment and, for a particular course. So if you go into CRJ 401, right? So this is an article I signed at the beginning of the semester. It's Ta-Nehisi Coates' The Case for Reparations. In this class, we are discussing institutionalized racism in the criminal justice system and sort of the origins and roots of racialized roots of criminal justice policy and practice. And so this particular article is a really important one for my students because it opens their eyes to the discrimination and inequality that is stemmed from redlining and legacies of slavery and Jim Crow and so forth that becomes really salient for students when thinking about current policy and how these seemingly other institutions impact our criminal justice system in such a tangible way. So enough about that. That's sort of why I picked this article, but I actually included anonymously some of the comments that my students have made. So I had to make all of these comments myself, right? Because I was the only one in the document at this time. But we students essentially, right, go through the article as they're reading. They can highlight an area of text, right? So kleptocracy, right? They can, annotate, they can say, I'm not sure what this means, right? And they might, ask other people, it can be question, right? What does this mean? So we can have, students make tags that are in the form of questions, right? And so we can just say question and post to self. So if I wanted to then look for all of the questions, right, in a document, I could, select the tag, right? And one comment, right, would come up if that tracks, right? So then you can kind of clear your search and you can see the other comments that students have made. So one of my students brought up as talking about this particular quote from a Mississippi senator, talked about voter suppression, and we actually had a lot of good feedback from other students, and so another student kind of continued on that conversation. And for my class, the guidelines for creating an annotation, are pretty broad and pretty, open to interpretation. It's a low stakes assignment for my class. So I asked them to engage with each other and to build on, each other's comments. So not just to reiterate what another person has said or to say, I agree, and kind of leave it into, the oblivion, but to, really kind of build on each other's work to bring a new perspective or to link their own experiences or content across courses to this particular reading, right? So, we had other students kind of continue on the conversation. What I really liked, which didn't always happen, but it's something that I kind of, hope to facilitate a little bit better in future classes. This particular student directly addressed, right, by name, the student that they were responding to. And I think there's something really great about when students are using each other's names. It humanizes each other, and it's, kind of helps them build that community and that relationship really early on in the classroom, which is important for a class such as this that's talking about very difficult conversations. And, it's a really, I think, it's a great way to encourage, those relationships. So, students, can, continue on the conversation. So all you have to do to create an annotation is highlight an area of text. Your options to highlight or annotate will come up. So you simply click annotate, and you can start making comments as you see fit, right? We can just make an example here. Now you can post to SELT, right? So this will be for everybody. There is a way to post privately, but I'm not sure if why I can't see that at the moment. So I'll have to get back to you on that. But can highlight, any part of the document, and that highlight is private. So only I will see that. So you won't, if other students are highlighting areas of the document, they won't see what others have highlighted. And that kind of, keeps, that allows them to kind of look at the document and have their own kind of documentation of what they've found important without kind of getting cluttered of all of the annotations. And so when you do have multiple students, right, you can select, right, those students. Paul has not created an annotation, right? This particular assignment I've set up to be graded, so you can enter in your grade here, right? So Paul gets a 0. You can submit the grade. Stephanie's, right? So you guys are now in this document, so you become students, right? Because you've viewed the document. So that is another kind of point to think about, is that if a student doesn't access the document, their name is not going to show up, right, in this list. So, you might have 20 students in the class. If there's only 18 here, that 2 students didn't even attempt to go into the document, right? So that you have to go enter in their grade separately in the grade center, because it won't give you an option to do it here. So that is kind of another point to think about. So do you have any questions, I guess, about this point? Yeah, go for it, Stephanie.
So in this example, you've got like multiple students, or like everybody in the, like, is everybody in the class responsible for making comments on this, like this one document, or like do they, so you mentioned that like the highlight is private to them.
Yes.
Is there a way to, like, I'm thinking like, so for my English 102 class, I have them read, and then I have them mostly just practice active reading and annotation in that way. So I'm not necessarily looking for them to like respond to one another's comments yet, because it's a 100 level class. So I want them to understand how to just make comments. Is there a way for me to like have one of these for every individual student?
Yeah. So
Okay.
if each of you, since you're both in this document at the moment, if each of you want to, highlight and create just an example annotation, if you did that now, then I can show you like how you would narrow it down by student. So
Okay, thank you.
yeah, so if you just create some examples, it doesn't have to say anything, right? John and I don't come up as students because we're leaders in the organization. So I think that's why I can't like narrow to me or to John, right? But if Stephanie, we have to.
I just made one.
Maybe I need to refresh it. There we are. Perfect, right? So you can go student by student, right? And, make a annotation, throughout. You can make 30, 40, you can make as many. I typically require students to make at least 3. And most of the time they make, 3 to 10, throughout a document. 3, I think probably isn't enough. Especially a document this size. So I think actually in this document, I have them do 5. But I could have them do 10 or 20, right? And kind of, change the scale of, how I'm assessing that accordingly. So, we can show all, right? So you'll see all 11 annotations. You can pick students like singularly from here. Paul's annotating, so he doesn't have a 0, right? We'll give you a 3 then for completing that annotation. And, right, so we can pick students singularly here. The only way they would have like a feed or like a reply chain is if instead of highlighting, text and making a comment, they hit the reply tool, right? The reply arrow here. That's where you're going to have, and actually, if you guys want, if one of you could reply to each other's comment, and I'll show you what that would look like too. So if you're looking at all students, right? If Paul, you want to reply to Stephanie's, and so if we go to Stephanie's.
I don't know if I see the all students thing that you have,
Yeah.
Maggie.
Um,
How can is there
you-
another way I can easily find Paul's?
Yeah, see, now that I'm thinking about it, you probably can't because you're a student, so you can't narrow it down by each person. So that I guess is you might have the ability to search though. Can you search through annotations here, like where my cursor is?
Yes, I think so. Hang on.
You could search, a person's name, but anytime that name comes up, even if it's in an annotation, it'll come up.
Even
Yeah,
when I searched for Paul's name, it didn't his comment didn't come up.
You can scroll through, right,
Okay.
the annotations and, find his comment, that way. Of course, when you have, 30 students and they're all making 3 to 5 comments, it's like 90, right? But the idea, right, is that students will be reading this article, and then as they, find, or, as they continue on, they'll see, I think you should see a little word bubble, right, that an annotation was made, and you should be able to see, as you come across new annotations, you should be able to see who's made the comments.
I can only see the one that I made and then your student examples. Like even when I scroll down, actually, maybe I should refresh it. Sorry.
No, it's okay. You should be able to see everyone's, but maybe.
There we go. I had to refresh it. So
Okay.
I can see Paul's now.
Okay, great. So if you see his, okay, so, Paul's replied, right? So if I click on Paul, right, I'm going to see, his standalone comment, right? But I'm also going to see the reply he made to yours. So so if you're assigning, this for a class and you want them to make their kind of standalone annotations, you can certainly instruct them to do that. For the most part, they probably won't use the reply function unless you prompt them to. But even if they did and they were worried about like, oh, did you not see that other comment? You will see it. So even if they've, they can highlight over somebody else's highlight to make a comment. Right. But they'll, get a notification, right, that there's another comment that was made on this. So they might choose then to reply. So I think you'll just have to be kind of careful about the instructions you give with that, if they need to have like standalone annotations or if replies to someone else's are okay too. You know, you could, if you really wanted like each document to be, you know, I guess depending on your purposes, right? You could create a document separate for each student. I think that tends to, it tends to be a lot more work, and you can't do the grading in that way, you know, for just one student. So it's, you know, it does give you kind of the function to narrow down to each student. So that's probably, that would be my suggestion, is to, you know, just kind of use that function to narrow down to each student. And so if I pick Paul, right, and I give him a grade, I submit it, it's, you know, I just click over, go to the next student, giving you 45. Okay, it's got to be out of 10. Okay, so give you a 5 and so forth. So, and it will show you, right, every comment that you do make. So if you make 20, if you make 30, you can go back, you can reply as the professor to all of your students. You know, it does, you know, whether students go back into the document to then, you know, read your message, they don't get a notification if someone's made a comment on their annotation. So that is kind of a caveat to using this as a discussion group. They won't necessarily get notified or, you know, even realize that someone commented on their thing unless they go back to that annotation and look at the feed, you know, that's continued in the conversation.
Maggie, can you make it so that individual student annotations are only seen by you? So if I go into the document.
Oh, I thought you could, I think you can, as a student, right, make an annotation, and if there's an option to, you know, only post to me, I think there is. It's hard to know because I'm not on the student side of it right now. I don't know if that's, I can post only to me, like my own comments.
And I know that the fundamental promise of this is to have it be interactive, but in Stephanie's case, there are at least some assignments that she has that it sounds like she doesn't want it to be interactive. So she just wants student A to post stuff and not see what students B, C, and D have posted and be distracted by that or whatever. So is there a way that the instructor can set it so that any of the students in that group, in that class section, would only be able to see their own stuff?
Yeah, so from my understanding, there's not a setting that you can, you know, create for the assignment that would like limit your ability to interact with each other. You know, if you're not seeing a post only, you know, to a post only to the professor, then I was in the understanding that there was an option to only post to the professor, but maybe I'm mistaken on that point. But
there is. I just went in as a student and tried to like and highlighted and then selected like only me. I didn't. Hang on. Let me write something.
Yeah. See if you can write something, because I thought there was an option, you know, to make things privately viewable, but maybe that's only, I thought that was open to the professor, but it may only be private to ourselves, right? Like our own comments and.
Okay. I mean, I don't think it would be, yeah, I mean, ultimately I would love for them to be able to like respond to one another and like that would be like the ultimate goal, right? But
Right.
I like to start something like this mostly as practice, but I mean, I suppose like if I don't tell them that they can search for each other, then maybe, you know, or I mean, if they do, then whatever.
Well, they will see the running list, you know, when
Okay.
they go into the document, they will see the running list over here. And so, yeah, that is, you know, that you could, right, create a separate assignment for each student and, have that assignment only accessible for each students, right? But this is, like Paul suggested, right? This is a social, annotation tool, so they will see everyone's comments on there. And it seems that, there are private comments you can make for yourself, but they're not shared to the professor either. And I know there's not a function to do that, like when you're setting up the actual assignments. I thought there was a potential to do to make a comment and, post it to just the professor, but I guess I'm not seeing that on my end. I thought that was the case, but I've always used it as a public document. Right, so any other questions? And hopefully I have an answer to.
So if you have an article that you used in fall of 19 and you're teaching the course again in fall of 22 for the first time, or for whatever reason you haven't used that article since then, can you go back to a previously annotated version and compare or do anything with that? And do these things age well?
So you can copy over the hypothesis assignment. You have to relink it right to the document, or the document will come up, but the other students old annotations won't carry on from one class to another. So, it's, I use this in all of my classes. So I copy it over from, from other course shells, but it doesn't carry over, the students' comments from previous semesters. So there's not an easy way to compare, across that. The only thing I would be careful about is if you are using a URL, that URL could have changed or gotten updated. And so you'll just kind of want to make sure that URL got updated appropriately if you're, especially if you're pulling back from a couple of years.
I have another question for you, Maggie. I know that the Brightspace thing is, there's a lot of question marks, but do you have any idea what, or I mean, maybe you could answer for Blackboard, how does one get hypothesis into the LMS? For Blackboard, is it just sort of there, or do you have to go get it? I know this might be a stupid question. And the same would be for Brightspace. How do you do this? How do you get it in there?
So I will show you how we create this document, right? Create this assignment in Hypothesis or in Blackboard. And then I'll, if I have enough time, I'll pop over to Brightspace and I'll show you where it will be. If it's not there, it's probably not there yet, but where it will be. So when you go to build content, right, you go down to kind of where our third-party tools are, and you'll see Hypothesis, right? Perusal is also another annotation tool. I haven't used Perusal, but this might be another option for you, Stephanie. They may have other tools that might allow you to post privately. I think I'll look into see if John has done a presentation on Perusal, because he might have at some point. So you click on Hypothesis, right? You create a name. So example for workshop. And this is just creating the assignment sort of shell, if you will. So you can decide whether or not you want to enable evaluation. If you do, right, you can say how many points possible. So maybe you want 10 points, maybe you just want 5. You can make it visible to students. I always encourage people to make that visible to students just for transparency reasons. You can select a due date. Could be end of day on, is that Friday? Yeah, end of day on Friday, right? You can track the number of views. It does that kind of automatically for you. You know, when you go into the document, the name of the student will appear if they've accessed the document. Then you can click submit. Okay, so this is now created, right? The example for workshop. Now, once you go into it, okay, this is where you will you can either enter the URL of a web page or PDF. I always typically download the PDF to my Google Drive, so I always have it from semester to semester, and I, select from there. So, I don't have one in mind at this moment. I guess we'll just do case for reparations because it's here. So we'll select, right? And this is a PDF, so this is not the website link for it, but we can. Right, and there's our document, and I'm not sure why it's showing this particular one with all of our, is that
Yeah.
weird?
The selection from Google Drive does not work reliably in Blackboard.
Okay.
The better thing is to use the upload option, upload the document. It will put it in Google
I've always
Drive.
done Google Drive though, but
if you download it and then upload it again, I know it's
Yeah.
bizarre, but the integration doesn't always work. We've had some issues with it
Okay.
this year.
this has never happened to
However,
me.
it should work better in Brightspace, and it should be
Okay.
available in Brightspace soon.
Soon, yeah. So
The process is the same.
yeah, this has not happened to me before, where it has carried over your annotations into a new hypothesis assignment. So why it did that, I do not know, but apparently
It should not have happened.
it should not have happened. So not sure why that will be a mystery for us. So you can, you can create a new one. Let's say you want to do, if you want to, pick a web page, right? We'll just call this example 2. Maybe this time we don't want to enable evaluation. We just click submit, and then you've got to go back into it, right? To, get the web page, right? So let's say comics and feminism. Let's say the web page we want is another Ta-Nehisi Coates article, right? Read the story for free. So this is one of those paywall examples that you're going to want to be careful about, right? Students can't actually access this one if you use this link, right? They're going to get hit with this paywall here. So let's find something different. Okay, maybe it's just, this article here, or this web page. Here we just copy the URL, go ahead, include it, submit. And there's the web page. Right, so you can make comments as you see fit. Let's make that public. So you can create those, assignments in a couple of ways. And let me show you, since we have 2 minutes, Brightspace, and see if we can at least locate where it would show up. I'll bring you into my women in crime class that I'm teaching this summer. So we'll just go into module 1 here. So if we go to upload and create, so kind of similar to where Blackboard was when it was build content, right? You can, I believe it'll be in here. Right?
I think
Is that
we
what we're
have to go to
thinking?
Course tools. And I think
You think
we
course
should,
tools?
and I may be wrong, or it might be.
Okay,
We don't have many integrations set up.
course tools.
Go up to the top and go
No, I'm
Oh,
not
the very
in
top,
as a
there should be
student.
course admin. You slide that slider up under course tools.
Okay.
Course
Course
admin.
admin.
And
External learning tools. That seems kind of hard
and
to get
that's
to.
where the list of,
Tools will be, but there's got to be a different way to
there's
do
gonna be
it.
another way.
There'll be a different way to do it, but we'll do
That is not
another.
set up yet. We
Yeah.
have no idea how it's going to work, but it
Yeah.
should be there within the next month.
Yeah, so it should be pretty seamless once it is in there to, you know, create a document in Hypothes.
It might also be under content.
Oh, yeah.
There it is. That's where. it's
External
going to be.
learning tools. Okay, so that's where it will
And
live.
if you click that, that's where you actually integrate the external.
Okay.
learning tools.
So right now, these are the only integrations that are available at the moment. So you'll add the activity, you'll click on it, add the activity onto a course page. So that will hopefully be very seamless, you know, as
And we'll
seamless
go
as,
over all that
yeah.
next week.
right, we will have
After we
a,
learn it.
yeah, after we learn it, yeah, we will have more to talk about, you know, in the coming weeks when we have a lot more time to dive into these tools. So
Oh, in 2 weeks. Yes.
in 2 weeks, yes. So June 6th through June 8th, we're going to talk about Brightspace workshops and we will, I'm sure, have more updated recordings in Brightspace for all of these tools. So thank you so much. I think I have to let us go. Thank you guys for attending.
Thanks, Maggie.
Thank you, Maggie.
And feel free to send me an email if you have any questions. And I will try my best to help.
And Hypothesis is wonderful. It really is, and students love it.
Yeah.
Good.